Good afternoon, everyone. Country Flyboy here, and today we are in the default Baron because today we're going to talk about the GPS. Now, the first video in this series talked about how the GPS works. It's important to understand how it works before we start talking about how to use it, because understanding how it works is going to make using it a little bit easier, because you'll know how it's gathering the information. We're here at Craig Municipal Airport, and we've selected a flight plan that will take us to Panama City, Florida. It's about a 250 nautical mile flight, probably a little less than that. But we're really not going to be going anywhere right now. We're just going to be sitting here on the ground talking about the GPS. I'm just going to mention how the GPS, or rather, what the GPS is like. So to bring up the default GPS, simply look for the satellite dish right there on your 2D panel, and that will bring it up. Alternatively, on most default planes, pushing Shift 3 will also bring it up. So I'm going to bring up the GPS, and we're going to make it full screen so you can see everything on it. There we go. So here we have the default GPS 500. As discussed in the previous video, there are two GPSs by default in Flight Sim, the GPS 500 and the GPS 295. Both of these GPSs in real life have since been discontinued by Garmin and are getting rarer and rarer to actually find. This one here was discontinued in favor of the GNS 530, which is in the process of being discontinued in favor of the GTX 750. Now, there is a lot of information that the GPS, in fact, I'm pretty convinced that not a lot of people really know how much information and how usable the default GPS actually is. Most third-party add-on airplanes, if they don't use their own GPS or a third-party add-on GPS, they're making use of the default GPS. So, obviously, it's got some qualities that make it good enough that if high-quality add-on developers think it's good enough to use, then there must be something to it. So let's talk about it. The GPS is divided into page groups, which are further subdivided into individual pages, and there's a few standalone pages as well. Let's talk about that. Now this here is the default navigation page. We're going to talk about this last, but just know for now that this is the default navigation page or page group, and it's divided up into two pages: north up, or track up, and north up. Guess what they do? We'll talk about them in detail later. But let's move on to the first page group I want to discuss before we get on to all these pretty buttons. This here is the facility information page. Now the first 4 pages of this group are devoted to airports. So we'll handle these in order. Here we have the airport information page, and you can find an airport, any airport in the database, or i.e. any airport in Flight Sim, simply by selecting here. Pushing the cursor knob in will bring up the cursor, which highlights a flashing green, as you can see. Pushing it again will get rid of the cursor. Pushing the small knob will tell the GPS you want to edit a character in this selection here. So as you can see, it's highlighted K. Now that I have a character selection editor brought up, I can use the big knob to change which character I want to edit, and the small knob to change the character itself. By the way, just real quick on these buttons here, if at any point you are editing bit of information and have messed up or decide you don't want to know any information, you don't need to, hit clear and it will default back to the previous selection, as long as you have not hit enter. Once you hit enter, you have confirmed that selection. Pushing clear any time prior to that will bring you back to the previous. So that's useful to know. And when you have the whole thing selected like this, the big knob will select information group. So here I can edit either one of these two things. You can bring up information for a particular airport by entering its identifier, which is the most common way, or by entering in the airport's name. Oops. Yeah, remember what I said about the clear? ST, St. Augustine is what I'm looking for. Well, You can type in the name, but I can't quite remember how to spell St. Augustine properly. You got to get it exactly the way it is in the GPS, otherwise it won't find it. It's usually best just to use the identifier, however. What's on this page is quite a bit of information. For one, we see that the airport identifier up here. Let's actually put this back to our departure airport, Craig. Airport identifier up here. This little circle with a line in it indicates that it is an airport with a hard surface runway. That circle will change to either a filled-in circle for a hard surface runway, where at least one runway at the airport is hard surface, a solid circle, or a not filled-in circle if the airport is a soft runway, or a circle with an anchor in it if it is a seaport, like Doctor's Lake just south of here. And the next is the word public. Now, in real life, that will be public, private, military, or whatever, depending on what the airport is. Craig, in this case, is a public airport. It's a public airport in real life. But in Flight Sim, only public airports are modeled. There is no private or military airport selection. They all will be public. The next bit is the facility name, city, and region. In this case, the airport KCRG is named Jacksonville Executive at Craig, and it's in Jacksonville, Florida. Its position on the world, that's the position of the airport reference point, which is the center point of the airfield. Its elevation and the type of fuel available there. In this case, avgas or 100 low lead and jet fuel is available. The approach will list the approach type that has the lowest minimums in the database. In the case of Craig, it's an ILS approach. Some airports, like Sierra India, the lowest minimums are on a VOR approach, and Hurlong near here, the lowest minimums are on an RNAV approach. So, yeah, that will show you which approach has the lowest minimums on the airport in the database. Radar and airspace are not functional in Flight Sim, but in real life they would tell you whether radar services is available at that airfield, i.e. is there a TRACON there, or who's handling TRACON services. And airspace will list the airspace type of that airport. Is it Class Delta, Charlie, Bravo, whatever. Although not modeled in Flight Simulator. The next page in this group is the runway information page. So at the top we see airport identifier, type, and subtype again. That's pretty much the same across all four airport info pages. Here we get a small map of the airport with a north up function. Quick tip, this over here is the range buttons, and at any time you see a map on the GPS like this, the range buttons will function and you can zoom in or out. Now this page will show you information on a given runway. Here it defaults to the longest runway at the currently selected airport. Craig is currently selected. Its longest runway is 1432 at 4,008 feet by 100 feet. It's an asphalt surface type, meaning this will show you the surface type of the airport, or that runway, and it's an asphalt surface. Now this next bit here, no lights. That indicates that there are no lights at this airport. The runways are dark. Part cannot find them in the dark, except it's wrong. There are actually lights here, and you can see them on the ramp. There's a taxiway edge, and you can kind of make out the runway edge lights over there. The lights are here. Why is it showing no lights on the GPS? Well, that's because this data comes from the current active AFCAD in your scenery, which can be overwritten by scenery add-ons. In this case, I have scenery for this airport that has custom lighting, which means the scenery designer had to remove the default lighting for the runways. So that's why it's saying no lights, even though there are lights at the airfields. So just note that that can be misleading. But if you know for a fact that you're using default scenery for an airport and you see no lights, then it's a pretty safe bet you're going to have a hard time finding that airport in the night. And if you want to change which runways, let's say I wanted to look up information about the other runway, just highlight the runway with the cursor, hit the small knob, and then you can use the small knob to select either of the runways there. In this case, let's bring up the other runway, and we see it's 4 feet shorter, it's still 100 feet wide, no lights, and it's an asphalt surface. The next page is the frequency page. Now there's a fun little feature that we'll get into in one of these videos. I'm not going to say the next one, but yeah, fun little feature. We can do, and that is quick tune of VOR or radio frequencies. I'm not going to get into that here, but basically you can send these frequencies from the GPS to the radio so that you don't have to turn knobs manually. This page will list all the frequencies for the airport. So all ATC frequencies: approach control, ATIS, clearance, departure, flight service, ground approach, tower, CTAF, Unicom, which unfortunately is not replicated in Flight Simulator, and the ILS frequency if there is one. Here we have the ILS 32 listed as 111.7. And the last page for airport information is the approach page. Do not confuse this with the load procedures page brought to you by that button there. This one is different. This one does not allow you to load procedures, but you can think of it as a preview. You can see what approaches are at a given airport. So here we have an ILS, a VOR, and a 1432 approach. Note the VOR approach has GPS next to it. This means that it's GPS driven. So if you were to load this approach, you could not fly it without a VOR because it's a VOR approach, and that means VORs are required. Even though you are capable of loading it in your GPS, you still could not fly this, and that's what that there indicates, is that this is driven by GPS on here, not relative to your VORs. So that's good to note. And this applies to all airports in the default database, or in the database, which is built off of your scenery. If I bring up, let's say Brunswick again, we can see its airports, or its approaches, 2 RNAVs and a VOR, and we noted earlier the one with the lowest minimums is the VOR approach, and we can even see its transitions. So this is a good way to preview the approaches and let you pick which one would work best for you. Now, here we have other pages in the facility information page group. Remember, this is the facility information page group, which includes non-airport facilities such as VORs or NDBs. In this case, we have intersections, which are subdivided into, or Flight Sim subdivides them into intersections and other intersections. In reality, they are subdivided into intersections and waypoints. Intersections are the point of intersect of 2 VOR radials, whereas waypoints can be positioned anywhere not relative to a VOR. Although Flight Sim classifies them both as the same. So here we can see information on any intersection or waypoint in the database. It's defaulting to the nearest one right now. Cedar is the closest, and we see the region it's in, the position in latitude and longitude, and we also see what is the closest VOR to it. In this case, Cedar is closest to the Craig VOR, CRG, and it's on the 150 radial at half a mile. Moving on to the or the NDB page, here we see the facility name, or the facility identifier, the facility name and region, as well as its position and its frequency. And VOR is much the same. However, there is an extra notation here. Note the ID info has changed, and we also have a variation indication. Now, here, CRG, it's got this symbol, and then it says high altitude. This symbol changes to tell you whether or not it's a VOR with DME, a VORTAC, or if it's DME only. Next, it'll tell you the VOR subtype, i.e. is it high altitude, low altitude, or terminal, which will tell you the ranges of the VORs. I don't quite remember the ranges off the top of my head, however. Then, same info here, facility name and location, frequency. Variation is a new one. Now, variation you need to be careful of. This will show you the magnetic variation of that waypoint, but magnetic variation can be off. Here it's showing the Craig VOR, which is that VOR station right over there, and it lists its variation at 3 degrees. However, I can tell you the variation for this airport is actually 5 degrees in reality land right now. Remember, Flight Sim's nav data is about 10 years out of date, and variation is part of the nav data. Also, sometimes you may see that variation as 0 if the scenery designer, when using third-party scenery, didn't do things correctly. Then the variation will be off. Now, WX broadcast. This is a neat feature found on real-life VORs, but not replicated in Flight Sim, no matter how much I wish it was. This here is part of the VORs as a weather station. 114.5 is this VOR's frequency. I'm going to tune that real quick. Now, in real life, if the VOR had a WX broadcast known as HIWAS, when I tuned the audio, I would be hearing the weather broadcast for the surface conditions of that VOR. I would also hear the Morse code. The weather broadcast is played in between the burst of Morse code. And it tells you the surface conditions at the VOR station. Not all VORs have that. You can determine if a VOR has that or not by looking at its information block on the chart. If it has an H in the top right corner, guess what? It has HIWAS available, and listening in on it can pick up the broadcast. Although that is sadly not replicated in Flight Sim, even though I really wish it was. The next page group is the nearest page, which has a lot of information that I'm pretty sure not a lot of people notice. So the first page here is the nearest airport page, and this shows you the closest airports to your current position. The one at the top is going to be the one you are currently parked at if you are on the ground. And right away you can see it has a lot of information. Here we can see the identifier of the airport. We can see the airport surface type. All of these are hard surface runways, i.e. one runway at the airport is hard surface. Here we have Foxtrot Lima 8, and it's got an anchor in it, so that means it's a seaport. There's another hard surface. Here we see a couple of soft surface, i.e. the circle's not filled in, indicating that no runways there are hard surface. They are soft surface, like sod, dirt, or grass. Next we see the bearing and distance to the airport. So Mayport here is bearing 061 at 6 nautical miles. So if I want to navigate direct to Mayport, I could simply look at nearest, then make my heading 061, which would be right there, and in 6 nautical miles I will reach Mayport. Next we see the frequency for the airport. The most important frequency if you're airborne is going to be the tower frequency, or CTAF frequency if it's an uncontrolled airport. Here the tower frequency is listed for controlled airports, 132.1 for Craig, and non-controlled airports will have their CTAF frequency, i.e. 123.0 listed. Now you may notice that there are some frequencies here that are all zeros. That means that's a pretty good bet that it's a private airport and doesn't have a published CTAF frequency. Now this last bit of information here again shows the approach, and it's listing which approach has the lowest minimum. So the lowest minimum approach at both Craig and NAS Jax, for example, is an ILS. If you zip down to Hurlong, you can see it's an RNAV. If there is nothing presented there, then that means the airport does not have any instrument approaches in the database. Now, this last bit of information, 4008, 7989, 6425, that, as you might have already figured out, is the length of the longest runway at that airport. Next page lists the closest intersections to your position. Intersection type would be listed here as well, i.e. it would be magenta if it was a waypoint, but they're always going to be blue in Flight Sim no matter what. Bearing, if it was, or the bearing and distance to the intersection. So if you wanted to go direct to any of these, fly this heading, and in this many miles you'll reach that intersection. Here we have NDBs, and in addition to bearing and distance, you also have their frequencies listed. And finally, we have VORs. And here, in addition to their identifier, bearing, distance, and frequency, we also see their type. Don't see their subtype, but we do see their main type, i.e. here is a VORTAC, here's a VOR, here is, I believe that's DME right there, or that may be a VOR without DME, VORTAC, VOR with DME, or VOR without DME, or simply DME. There is no DME only VORs listed here, but they would show up with some symbol. I can't quite remember which off the top of my head. By the way, if you want to bring up the extra information, i.e. you want to see the information page on any one of these VORs, simply highlight the one you want and then hit enter. And that will send that VOR to the information page, allowing you to see its type, subtype, variation, position, frequency, all that fun stuff. The last nearest page is the airspace page. This will show what airspace is nearby. And this is the only one tied to the message function, which we'll get into in a second. So here we can see Craig Municipal. We are inside of its airspace. We are within 2 nautical miles of Mayport's airspace. Whiskey 158 Foxtrot is close enough that the GPS is telling us it's nearby, i.e. it's close enough to be of some concern. And Jacksonville is also nearby, and I assume it's referring to the Jacksonville class Charlie right here. Now, that's all of the page groups, but real quick I just want to talk about these buttons before we get into the main navigation page. Now, these buttons will allow you to either quickly access a particular page that would be of some use that's in a group somewhere, or access one of the standalone pages, or show a function of the GPS that's not page group related. The first button, or actually let's go over here first. Here we have the range button, and as I mentioned before, anytime there's a map you can zoom in or out with these buttons. This one here is the zoom in, this one here is zoom out, and you can get your current zoom level from this indication right here. Zoom 15 nautical miles, which means from the nose of your aircraft here to the top of the screen is 15 nautical miles. That's 10, that's 5. Next here is the direct to waypoint feature. This will allow you to navigate directly to any waypoint in the database, as well as a nearby airport or a waypoint on your flight plan. Be careful with this page. If you have a flight plan loaded, as I currently do, this page will overwrite your current flight plan. It doesn't do that in real life. Instead, it just adds a new waypoint as the current active waypoint and any inactive waypoints below it on the flight plan. But this will overwrite your flight plan in Flight Sim. The way it works is you, of course, just type in the identifier of a particular facility you want to go to. It doesn't have to be an airport. It can be VORs or even NDBs and even waypoints. So it doesn't have to be an airport, although airports are usually going to be the most used function. And just like before, you can type in their identifier or their name if you know it. In addition to that, you also have the ability to quickly call up going direct to any one of the waypoints in your flight plan. Here's the current loaded flight plan. The way you access this is by moving the cursor down to the flight plan box here, then pushing one of the small knobs, arrows, to bring up the waypoints. Select the waypoint you want to go direct to, i.e. the Mariana VOR here. Hit enter, and it'll bring up the information. Note, the second I did that, i.e. hit enter, it made active flash. If I were to hit enter again, that would activate the direct to function, overriding my flight plan and making me go direct to the Mariana VOR. To not do that and go back, simply hit clear. And also you can navigate direct to a nearby airport by highlighting the nearest function, which is only airports, not facility and other facilities. Clicking the small knob again, and it will show you the nearby airports, and you can pick which one you want to go to. Enter brings it up. And also, in addition, I want you to note this down here. Here you have the position of the airport, but you also have the course. So let's say, for example, you want to go direct somewhere, but you want to resume your flight plan after that. The way you can do that is by just entering the direct to here, noting the course to it, then clearing it and making that your course. That's a way to go direct to a waypoint that's not in your flight plan and not overwrite your flight plan. Again, that's simply enter in the place you want to go direct to, note its course. This here indicates the course to fly if you want to go straight there from your present position. Note that down and then clear, make that your course, and that will take you right there. Next is the menu button. This has no functions outside of the flight plan page. So, well, that's pretty much it. Now, clear serves three purposes. Clear on the default navigation page will declutter the nav page. So here you can see we have airspace, airports, waypoints, names, identifiers, all that fun stuff. This can get a bit confusing at extreme zoom levels, and especially in congested areas like, say, Orlando. So to make it a little less confusing, you can hit the clear button, and that will declutter the screen. As you can see, it has removed the airport airspaces. We still see special use airspaces like this MOA and these warning areas, however. Pushing it again will select the next declutter level, which will remove intersections, VORs, waypoints, and stuff like that. And the last clear or declutter section will remove all other symbology, and it currently only shows special use airspace and your flight plan route. Though those are the three declutter modes, pushing clear again will bring everything back. You can know which declutter mode you are in by looking at the zoom key over here. See the -1 when I did that? -2, -3. That indicates which declutter mode we are currently in. The next function that this thing serves is on any of these page groups, like say the direct to. If I really quickly decide that I don't want to do that anymore, I can just hit clear and it will erase it or bring it back to the previous entry as we discussed earlier. Also, this last function is probably the most useful, is that if at any point you ever get lost in the amount of information here and you're confused as to which page you're on, simply push and hold the clear button and it will take you back to the default navigation page. Push and hold the clear button for 2 seconds, takes you right there. So you will never be lost in your GPS. If at any point you get lost, simply push and hold that. Enter, well, I'm pretty sure you know what enter does. And again, cursor just allows you to bring up the cursor in other pages. Now these buttons along the bottom will allow you to access some standalone pages as well as special features. First one, nearest, will quickly bring you to the nearest page group. Nearest is most used in an emergency or any situation where you need to divert, so this can be very useful. The next one is OBS. OBS, or Omni Bearing Selector. That sounds strikingly similar to this little knob right here. Omni Bearing Selector Nav 1. What could that be? Why is that both on my VOR and my GPS? Well, the reason is, in real life, that has the function of letting you select the course to steer to a particular waypoint. So in real life, pushing that button will allow you to define the course to a waypoint. So let's say I wanted to go to this waypoint here. I'll make that active real quick. We'll discuss doing that in a second. Now let's say I wanted to go to that waypoint on something other than the straight line from my previous waypoint. So here's the previous waypoint, here's the currently selected one. Let's say I don't want to go in that MOA. We find out it's active and I want to avoid it. I could navigate to the Taylor VOR, but let's say I want to stick as close to my current route as possible. In real life, you have the option of pushing this button here and then defining a course with your CDI, and then your magenta line will actually move to have that course to that waypoint, effectively allowing you to use your GPS and any waypoint in its database as a sort of de facto VOR driven via the GPS. Unfortunately, that particular function is not modeled in Flight Simulator, as useful as it would be. The second function that button has is it suspends automatic waypoint sequencing, and in Flight Sim that is the only thing that button does. As you can see, SUSP for suspend has been brought up here, and that means automatic waypoint sequencing has been suspended, i.e. when I hit that waypoint, it will not select the next waypoint until I either reassume automatic sequencing or manually select that waypoint. That can be useful if you need to go AFK, by the way, and you don't want to progress further than the next waypoint until you're back at the computer. Simply turn that off, and if the autopilot's flying the plane, it will begin flying a circle around that waypoint when it gets there. Not a holding pattern like it should, but a circle. The next button is message, and this is not replicated too well in Flight Sim. As you can see, it does have some messages here, but the only messages it will show you are when you are approaching airspace. So here it's telling me we are inside some airspace, and we're also near some airspace that's less than 2 nautical miles away. In real life, you can program additional messages and reminders, such as, say, switching fuel tanks. But that feature is not replicated in Flight Sim. That button will start to flash all the darn time and become annoying, so you can turn it off simply by clicking it 3 times, or 6 times actually. 1, 2, 3, and every other. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that will go to off, disabling the new message function. Very, very useful. This button here, labeled Flight Plan, this is the button that will bring up your current flight plan information. It also is what you would push to build a flight plan. Now, unfortunately, Flight Sim does not allow the building of flight plans in the GPS. You have to import a flight plan file with the flight planner here. Although there are some third-party GPSs that do allow you to build a flight plan inside the gauge, default Flight Sim GPSs unfortunately do not. So here you see your current flight plan, which in the real GPS can be saved, and the saved number would appear here. Can't save flight plans in the GPS gauge, unfortunately, in Flight Sim, so that number is always going to be 0. The current flight plan name appears here, which in Flight Sim is always going to be the departure airport to destination airport. And then we have the various waypoints on the flight plan, the desired track between the waypoints, i.e. the track that you're going to fly from one waypoint to the other, the distance along that track, i.e. this waypoint here is 122 nautical miles away from this one, which is 26 from this one, yada yada yada. And then we see cumulative distance, which is the total distance remaining to that waypoint along the flight plan. That is not a distance straight to the waypoint. I want to be very clear on that. That is not, if you were to go direct to that waypoint from your present position, that's how far you would go. No. I can tell you Echo Charlie Papa is not 262 nautical miles away. In fact, if we were to bring it up in the information page, we can see that it is... Actually, I need to go to direct to, don't I? We can see that it's 278 nautical miles away, not 262. So, yeah, that is along the flight plan, i.e. along your magenta line. That's how far you're going to go. That is very critical that you know that. This next button here only functions on the default nav page, and that is terrain. That will toggle terrain on or off. Now, we're down here in northern Florida in the coastal plains, so there's no terrain to affect us, but you can see terrain shading up here in the Appalachians. Right up in there. Some over here. That is not what the ground looks like as far as foliage and whatever, i.e. this is not all grass, this is all urban, but that is the terrain height. The shading, i.e. the more brown it is, the higher it is. You can toggle that on and off by pushing that button. Now, the procedure button. This is the procedure load page. This is, again, not the same as this page here. This is a procedure preview page and it only shows approaches. This here is the one that you would use to actually load approaches in your GPS. Now, in real life, this GPS is capable of loading SIDS and stars as well, but unfortunately Flight Sim only modeled approaches as far as procedures. So, as you can see here, it does have the info, departure, approach, arrival, but only an approach can be loaded, not a departure or an arrival. And the way you do it is by highlighting Select Approach, which will be selected by default if there is no procedure loaded. Hit Enter, and then you can select your chosen approach, or the one you were assigned by ATC. Let's say the RNAV 34. Select your transition, let's say Clark, and then you have the option to either load or activate it. Most of the time you're going to load it, but if you've already been cleared for the approach and you're on your way to the initial waypoint, you can go ahead and activate it, and that will overwrite your flight plan but activate the approach. And once you load a procedure, you can see its information will appear on the flight plan page, i.e. Clark, the track to WestG, its distance, tie box, all that fun stuff. And note, this cumulative distance is separated from your flight plan cumulative distance up here. So Clark is the origin point for this cumulative distance. WestG is 38 nautical miles. Tie box is 46 nautical miles along these courses from Clark, etc. You also see other information. Hold at the other part. Hold at the end. There will also be arcs and stuff like that shows up. Going back to procedure at any time, you can see quickly which procedure is loaded down here. RNAV 34 in our case. Now, that covers all the buttons, pages, and page groups, except for the default nav data. The default navigation one. We're going to cover that as quickly as possible, but there is a lot of information to go over here. Now, the default nav page group is separated into two pages. In real life, there are more than that, but in Flight Sim, they only modeled two with the default GPS as far as the navigation page group is concerned. So we have both Track Up, which puts the current aircraft track at the top of the screen, and North Up, which puts the true north of the map at the top of the screen. Pretty self-explanatory there. Also note that North Up gets rid of all this extra information. It can be very useful for seeing just where at on your flight plan you currently are. So you can see here's our flight plan, here's the approach we just loaded, all that fun stuff. But by far, Track Up is the most useful. Now I want to note something here. Note that our current track is 360 by the GPS, but if you look at our magnetic compass, that is not our track. We're actually tracking about 0.6 or 0.51 degrees. So why are these two different? Well, that's because this is where I spawned my aircraft. And when you spawn the airplane and don't move it, the GPS is going to default to track as being north. The way you correct that is simply by moving the airplane. So I'm going to move it forward a little bit, bring it to a stop, and you can see the track has corrected to match my current magnetic heading. So make sure you are aware of that before doing so. Make sure you move the aircraft so the GPS can get a position alignment. Now, I'm going to cover the stuff on the sidebar here in a second. Let's talk about the navigation data blocks here. Starting from the top right and going counterclockwise down this way, here we have distance. This is the current distance from present position remaining to your waypoint that's currently selected. So the first waypoint that I have selected here is a custom waypoint. We'll get into making custom waypoints in another video, but I-10 I-75 is a non-default custom waypoint that I set. I'm currently 64 nautical miles from it. Track is my current magnetic track of the airplane. That is the track I am going along, i.e. that is adjusted for wind. That is not a heading, that is your track. Here we have the desired track. This is my track to go from this waypoint, i.e. Craig, to the next waypoint, i.e. that custom one that I set, which is off screen over here somewhere. So, fun little fact, if you want to parallel your course without being on that line, all you have to do is make these two numbers match. So if I'm over here somewhere and I don't want to get on course but I want to go the same direction as my course, then all I gotta do is make my track 273. And even though I'm not on the magenta line, I'm still following along it to some extent. That could be, you know, offsetting your flight plan track for safety reasons. Zoom level, we already talked about. Ground speed, this is the current ground speed of the aircraft. That is not true airspeed, that is not indicated, that is ground speed. Now here we have the CDI. This is completely GPS driven and is not relative to your VORs. So even if you have VOR tuned and selected in the radio, this is relative to your flight plan course, not that VOR. The next one here is the current active leg info. My current active leg is from Craig via a track to fix leg to I-10 I-75. This indication here is important because it shows you what the leg type is. There are several leg types, and you would learn those when you talk instrument flying, but the main ones you need to concern yourself with a GPS is simply track to fix, arc to fix, hold to fix, and heading. That's it. There are about 20 different leg types, but those are the only ones you need to really worry about with GPS. In this case, we have a straight line going from this waypoint to that waypoint, indicating that is a track to fix leg type. There's also the direct to fix leg type, which will have this with a D in it. And this is the waypoint we are currently going to. Right here we have the estimated time en route, or the estimated time remaining from present position to the currently selected waypoint. Now, this sidebar, probably the most misunderstood and underused thing in Flight Simulator, right here. This sidebar has a wealth of information on it. So, firstly, it shows you your currently selected waypoint. In some cases, it can differ from this down here, but not usually. Here we see the bearing. This is the heading that will take you directly to your current selected waypoint. So, another way you can go direct is to make any, say, ATC cleared me direct from present position to Seminole VOR. I can simply activate that, and you can see the bearing has changed. The Seminole VOR is bearing 282. So if I want to go straight to the VOR from present position, I simply make my track 282. I simply make this number match that number instead of that number, and then I will be going straight to that waypoint. Not along this, but along a direct line. That bearing, again, straight to the waypoint. Course to steer. This is the recommended direction to steer to reduce the course error and stay on course. Translation, that provides the most efficient heading to get back on course. Let me reactivate this. Actually, no, we don't need to activate it. So, if I go to north up, you can see the flight plan leg I activated is way over here. I'm way over here. In order for me to get the most efficient heading to get me back on that magenta line, if I had to navigate off of it for whatever reason, would be displayed here, the course to steer. So if I fly heading 302 right now, that will take me in the most efficient heading back onto that magenta line. That is very useful, especially when you're flying an approach. You don't need to know you don't need to guess what the best angle to intercept a particular course is. This one right here will tell you. Estimated time of arrival is the estimated time in local time that you will get to that waypoint. It's derived from the current time plus the estimated time en route. Now, when you are parked on the ground and ground speed indicates 0, estimated time en route indicates 0, this is just going to read the current local time, which is 14:23. VSR stands for vertical speed required. That is a VNAV function. Now, default GPS does have a rudimentary VNAV. It doesn't come into play except when you're shooting approaches and only when you are airborne. So let's activate this approach real quick. This didn't change, but that's because I'm not airborne at the moment. If I was airborne at, say, 4,000 feet, and let's just say, the sake of the argument, that Clark, the first waypoint, had a crossing restriction of 4,000 feet, this here will show, or 2,000 feet, not 4,000 feet, this here will show me the descent rate needed to go from my present position and cross that VOR, or that waypoint, at the correct altitude. The GPS knows what altitude it has to be at. Unfortunately, it doesn't display it on the screen. It'd be nice if it did. That only functions on approaches, does not function en route. Although you can actually set a cruise altitude in your flight plan and even crossing restrictions on waypoints in Flight Simulator. This is always going to default to 0 for en route. At least I think. We'll have to test that out when we actually do the using the GPS video. But yeah, that is a rudimentary VNAV, and it shows the descent rate from present position to cross the waypoint at the right altitude. And also, it shows it in feet per second, not feet per minute. So if you want to get feet per minute, you have to multiply by 60 this number. So if it showed, for example, if it showed a required descent rate of 2 feet per second times by 60, that is 120 feet per minute. Next here we have TKE, which is the track angle error. This is the angle difference between the desired track and your current track. So desired track here, current track here, and this is the angle difference between them, i.e. 278 degrees is minus 133 degrees from 051. And here, XTK is the cross track error, i.e. the difference you are off of your desired course in any direction. So here it shows 0, and here we see we are directly on the course. Let me activate a different leg. This one here. Actually, no, not that one. Activate that leg. And here you can see that it shows we are 20.4 nautical miles left of the course. And if we go to north up, you can see that is certainly the case. Or no, that arrow points to the left, indicating the course is to our left. Sorry. So this here pointing to the left indicates we are right of the course. Pointing to the right indicates we would be left of course. So we are 20.4 nautical miles off of this course line here. That is what that is indicating. And you can also see that here. By the way, these squares on the CDI are to scale. Right here is on course, right here is 1 nautical mile off course, and right here is 2 nautical miles off course. Now keep in mind, airways have a 2 nautical mile either side of centerline radius. So, or width. So, if you want to offset from an airway with the GPS, you'd have to use heading select to do this with the default GPS. You can program an offset with a real GPS, however, but default GPS you have to use heading select, make these two numbers match, and just keep this little bar that would appear here if it wasn't way the heck over there right now, on that right there, and you would be 1 nautical mile right of the course. And this here will tell you that. Now, the bottom of the page here just tells you extra information. Here is the current phase of flight. Your flight can be divided into different phases: departure, en route, arrival, and approach. Those are the 4 phases of a flight. So here would show you the departure, or here would show you the current phase of flight you would be on relative to your flight plan. So if this could show SIDS and stars, this would also have that ability, but unfortunately the only things modeled here is either en route and approach. If I activate the approach again, you can see it switches to approach mode. Here just displays extra features like is suspense, or is the waypoint sequencing suspended or not, and is there a new message. This here will show you the current page group and page name you are on. Here we have waypoint or facility page info, nearest page group, and nav page group. So that's the name of the current page group you're on, and this here indicates which page you are in. So here in the facility information page, you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages, and the one in white is the current one we are on, i.e. now we are on the 4th out of 7 pages in this group. Now that is all of the buttons and information display on the default GPS. Next video we'll be discussing normal use of the GPS as well as a few extra tips to get the most out of it. So hope you enjoyed this video, and we will see you on the next one.